Before we start today's show, we want to invite you to stick around at the end of the episode to enjoy a preview of a new podcast that premieres on July 14th. As the industry's exclusive cannabis podcast network, MJBulls is proud to present Women Leading in Cannabis. Join host Kira Reed each week for inspirational discussions with women who are leading the cannabis industry.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show. This is Jim Marty reporting from cold and snowy, but blue sky today with snow on the ground here in Longmont, Colorado. How are things in Chicagoland, Larry?
Jim, nice to say hello to you and have another episode here. Chicago is Chicago, so a day and a half ago it was 70 degrees, and today it's 35 and snowing. Saturday was so nice that all of the trees started to bloom, all the cherry blossom trees and all that stuff. And now today, everything is getting frosted over and falling off the trees. So, other than that, though, I can't complain. Things are good, keeping busy as we get closer and closer to Illinois' application deadline just around the corner here. And, this looks like this is a firm deadline this time, which will be good to get those applications in and see where everything goes. But otherwise, no complaints. Knock on wood, everyone in my family is healthy right now, and hope yours is doing the same.
Yes, things are good here in Colorado. We don't have that many infections and death on the coronavirus, but we're in the middle of our lockdown here. The silver lining, if you could call it, is that cannabis has been deemed an essential industry, so our adult use and medical marijuana are still open here in Colorado, and most of our clients are reporting very strong sales as people incubate at home. And how is Illinois' adult use program?
Well, as long as we can keep product on the shelf, the numbers are pretty amazing. As of last week, within the last 2 weeks, they came out with new numbers in Illinois. Since January 1, it's had over $100 million in sales, understanding that we have a constant product shortage. So, those are numbers that are being generated with a small number of dispensaries because all the new ones haven't come online yet, and with very limited amount of supply. So we're all looking at that as a positive, that this is a real market that's just waiting to explode once we can kind of get everything in place and once people can come back outside and do the things that they like to do, including traveling to their local dispensary. As we get closer to the application deadline, everyone's getting nervous. I'm getting calls from people all over the place. Looking forward to getting everything rounded up now, but I think I have a good group of clients who are going to put in some good applications, and it'll be very exciting to see what happens there. So otherwise, we're doing well with that. Jim, we are very lucky today, and we've really made an effort to bring more and more guests onto our show, and we have been lucky because we've had some really, really interesting guests from the fields of cannabis. We had Jay Blakesberg, the photographer for the Grateful Dead, and a number of other people. But today, we really kind of hit a home run. Because our guest today is a guy named Rob Hunt, and I met Rob years ago at one of some conference in Las Vegas where I was doing a presentation, and he was sitting in the audience. And after I was done, and after we were, he came up to me, we talked for a few minutes, and it became very clear to me very quickly. Not only did he know what he was talking about, but he knew that I didn't necessarily know what I was talking about on everything. And rather than rake me over the coals in front of a conference room of people, he was kind enough to chat with me about it on the side. But Rob really, as you'll find out, has a tremendous amount of experience in the cannabis field, primarily in raising capital for people and for groups for investment purposes. But since we are the Deadhead Cannabis Show, Rob will also have some interesting stories to tell us with respect to business deals that he has worked on, both with the Dead and with the Garcia estate. So, Rob, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
It's nice to have you.
Yes, and Rob reminded me that he and I worked together a number of years ago when cannabis was just getting started here in Colorado back in 2009, 2010. So nice to get reacquainted with you, Rob.
Definitely, Jim.
So Rob, do us a favor. You have quite a background and quite an impressive resume in the industry. Give us, 30 seconds of self-promotion. How did you get into the industry? What have kind of been the highlights and where are you at today?
Wow. I started in the industry full-time in 2007 after I graduated law school. In law school, I'd done a one semester kind of a project on the disparity between state and federal law as it pertained to medicinal cannabis back when there was only 11 states in America with laws in the books. I hit Colorado in 2007 and decided that rather than, getting directly into the industry, I would do something that would support the industry. So in 2008, I opened up a hydroponics gardening supply store called Rocky Mountain Hydroponics. I grew that from 1 store to 4 stores in Colorado, and then started opening stores in the Northeast under the name Evergreen Garden Center. By the time it was all said and done, I was servicing north of 100 commercial accounts. Sold that business in 2013 and sold it to a company that had additional stores on the West Coast. So managed the retail side of that business for a year after that. And then started what is now one of the largest private equity firms in cannabis called Tuatara Capital, which I started in 2014. Then took that into a business that was more of a market intelligence firm than anything else called Shingle Hill, where we worked with private equity funds, hedge funds, family offices, and high net worth individuals. Really trying to help them price assets in the cannabis industry and, what an appropriate value for a business is, both on the buy side and the sell side. And then most recently, I've started a new pool of capital, specifically looking at doing a roll-up in the California market, and that's called Linnaea Holdings.
Certainly, I have more questions for you and comments than our time slot allowed, so we'll just jump in. And here at Bridge West, we do service several hundred cannabis companies nationwide, and they are finding that today's environment, even without the coronavirus, is a very difficult environment to be raising capital. I think the significant fall off in the value of the Canadian stocks has really spooked a lot of investors, and a lot of investors are staying on the sidelines. Rob, jump in there with your comments.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jim. 2019 was a kind of a watershed event where the luster came off the cannabis industry largely because of unrealized expectations in the Canadian market. So, we've all seen the Canadian values get decimated by, 90+% for a lot of those businesses. But, anyone that was watching the industry closely, I think, could have predicted that the Canadian companies were terribly overvalued. And the reason that they were is because, a lot of investors that weren't able to invest in the United States for fear of illegality decided they did want to invest in cannabis, and they felt safer doing so under the federal guidance of Justin Trudeau's government, where cannabis is, legalized at a federal level. While I understand, kind of the rationale behind it, it certainly didn't translate to a large addressable market. And, Canada as a country is smaller than California is. So as people started to realize that, what was being put forward in these prospectuses just wasn't achievable, ultimately reality sunk in, and you started seeing the values just completely shredded in Canada. What you saw as a result, and the ripple effect of that, is that it really started affecting available capital in the U.S. market, both on the public side and, more importantly, on the private side. So if you think of U.S. companies as kind of the proverbial baby with the bathwater, they were getting, destroyed as well in value because of the perceived risk that was, kind of attached to how people were viewing Canada. So 2019 was just a really tough time, and unfortunately, we haven't really seen a recovery come out of that yet. We've seen asset values drop to, kind of more appropriate levels of where you want to invest. But actually finding people that want to invest in those assets has become significantly more difficult, as most guys that wanted appetite for this market are now underwater on their portfolio, and they're trying to figure out kind of how to salvage what they already have rather than making new investments.
Right. Which makes it a difficult time to bring new projects to these same investment groups where they're still reeling from the losses that they've incurred. One of my comments is that we can get into profitability and taxation, especially in California, but many of these publicly traded Canadian companies were reverse mergers on the Canadian Stock Exchange of U.S. cannabis companies. And as a CPA and an accountant, one of the things people really underestimate is the extra layer of expense you have when you're a publicly traded company. You have filings, you have audits, you have accountants, you have a whole layer of bureaucracy that a privately held company doesn't have. And, with the taxation, the after-tax margins for cannabis companies, a lot of times are not strong enough to support that extra layer of bureaucracy. Larry and Rob, I'll be quiet and let you comment on that.
Well, I think that that's true, Jim, in terms of what you say, that you do build that in. But if you forgive me, I have a much simpler question. At least it's a simple question for me, for Rob, because it's not very often you get the opportunity to talk to somebody who really has the command of the knowledge of the market and the industry that he has. And here's what it is. I sit around with a lot of my friends, and I wear two hats. One hat that I wear is I'm a lawyer in the industry. I have a certain amount of expertise, up to whatever level people want to believe that I know what I'm talking about. And, that's all very good. My other hat is I'm just a big fan of marijuana. And like anybody else who's a fan of marijuana, I like to either go to the local dispensary or wherever I can find my marijuana, especially when we're all sheltering in for a while. This is the question that I get, and I'm not smart enough to answer it. All this stuff that you just got done talking about, to me, when I hear that, I'm thinking, well, this is information that I need to know if I want to be an investor in this industry. But what does all of that mean to the average consumer who just wants to be able to go to their dispensaries? Are we still going to have supplies? Are prices going to go through the roof? Should it just be business as usual? How do we translate that information to something that the common marijuana smoker can understand and appreciate?
It's a great question. And, oftentimes I get wrapped up in the minutia of, what it means from this side of the table. And I forget that the average consumer of cannabis doesn't care about any of that. What they care about are a couple of very simple points. One is price, one is access, one is safety. That's primarily, kind of what drives decisions. I always look at it from the perspective, and I'll use an analogy to kind of go through this. But I think about what 1933 looked like for alcohol prohibition as it was repealed, and there's this prevailing belief that the second that prohibition was repealed, that immediately people started using liquor stores as their primary way to access alcohol. When after multiple years of prohibition, it didn't happen overnight. You still had the rum runners, and you still had the Bronfmans and the Kennedys crossing the Canadian border, and you still had bathtub gin, and you still had backwoods moonshine stills. So what it took to really migrate people over, and you can look at the history of Washington State as you think about this, is creating a more efficient marketplace. And that more efficient marketplace, said, okay, in order for people to make this migration over, we've got to be able to offer a better selection, a safer selection at a better price. And if we do, then that migration happens relatively quickly. If not, then we're artificially keeping alive an illicit market, and that illicit market's going to stay well entrenched. They already have the market share right now. They don't want to give it up. And that's what we're seeing right now in cannabis. And we're not just seeing it in the producer states like the Washingtons, Oregons, and Californias, but we're seeing it in the consumption states. It's if you think about where you are in Illinois, or let's say New York City, those states never had a robust cultivation culture, but they certainly had a consumption culture. So when you think about the illegality or the illicit market in California, it's very, very different than the illicit market in Chicago. Chicago's illicit market is truly on the consumption side. They're importing cannabis from out of state and they're consuming it there, but it still represents a huge portion of the industry. In California, it's twofold. It's the production side that's happening in the northern counties, and it's the consumption that's happening from the consumer. So as a consumer is thinking about what does all this stuff mean for me? Look, if their guy can deliver cannabis at a cheaper price with a decent selection, then the illicit market stays viable and it stays attractive. If the tax rates drop low enough in California and enough municipalities open up retail stores, then suddenly it becomes more efficient just to go down to your local dispensary where you go, all things being equal on the margin, I'm going to buy cannabis from the legal place because I know it's been tested, I know it's safe, I know what's in it, I know where it came from, and the price is commensurate, and the convenience is better. I can do it at my time instead of waiting for my guy to show up. So that's the major issue that we're dealing with right now, is how do you migrate over the illicit market to the legal, and how do you do it at a price that is attractive?
Very good points, Rob. And let's talk a little bit about one of the barriers to that changeover. And many people say over the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a big transition in California from the illicit to the legal market. But one of those hurdles is taxation. That taxation at the cash register in California can be as much as 40%. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking a great deal about, because As asset values have dropped, Jim, what we're seeing is, a lot of people outside of the industry right now talking about the fact that, cannabis executives are ill qualified to run these businesses. They don't know how to run an efficient business. And I don't think that any of those executives that have never worked in cannabis have any idea what kind of headwinds you face as a cannabis operator to deal with these tax rates you just alluded to. When you think that the state's excise tax rate is 15% on top of a municipal tax rate that could range from 5 to 15%, then you think about a cultivation tax that is north of $150 per pound for every cultivator, and then you think about the distribution tax and the manufacturing tax, and then the cannabis business tax of another 10%, and then on top of that, you've got the granddaddy tax of them all in 280E at the retail level specifically. It's almost impossible. These businesses are being set up to fail, and I'm actually in the process right now of writing an article exactly about this. Where during COVID, I found myself with some free time on my hands, some self-publishing articles on LinkedIn to talk about the California market and issues it had going into COVID, and taxes. Primarily the one driving factor that's keeping the illicit market artificially alive, and it's because there's too many people with their hands in the pockets of the cannabis operators that there's very, very little chance without massive amounts of scale that these guys can operate profitably because of how many people are taking a piece of their business out. Where, the smarter way to do it, and this is something that Gavin Newsom as governor out here is finally starting to realize, it's much better to have a lower tax rate that taxes 100% of the market than it is to have a really high tax rate that at most is only, hitting 25% of the market because the other 75% is still in the illicit market. So it's how do you find that balance? And then once you've eradicated the illicit market, then you can start migrating a higher tax rate back in. But it's kind of like, the analogy I give here is the oil industry where, as oil prices go up in Saudi Arabia, it incentivizes the Canadian tar sands producers to turn on their production. But if oil prices drop like they are right now, then there's no way the tar sands guys or even like the Americans can make a profit. So as like prices fluctuate up, then it introduces new entrants in the market. And for us in cannabis, that's the illicit market. And hopefully that's an appropriate analogy.
No, it's very good. I agree 100%. People don't realize how hard it is to be profitable in this industry. I work with my clients all the time on those very issues, and you have to have enough gross profit to be able to pay your taxes and your overhead and still have something left over for you. Larry, before we shift over to music, do you have any more business you'd like to talk about?
Well, it's such a trite question, and people always just knee-jerk jump to it. And I get asked it all the time, and rarely do I have a chance to pass it on to somebody else. So, Rob, let me ask you this, and sorry to put you on the spot, but where are we at federally? Where are we going? And if and when are we going to see change in federal law? Your best guess.
I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible, but my guess is that, we're still 5 years out from federal legalization. It will come, but, realistically, and, again, COVID's changing things quickly because I think for the first time, I don't think most of the country is necessarily expecting that Trump will win a second term based on where the economy is right now. But I think as of a month and a half ago, the smart money was that he would. The smart money also was that the Republicans were going to hold the Senate. So if you think there's a three-person majority in the Senate today, and even if it was even, you got a tie-breaking vote in Vice President Pence. It was a really unfavorable Senate map in this election cycle. So maybe the Dems pick up Martha McSally's seat in Arizona. Maybe they pick up Susan Collins' seat in Maine. Maybe they pick up Tom Tillis' seat in North Carolina. But they're certainly losing. They're definitely picking up Gardner's seat in Colorado, I think, at this point. But they're definitely losing Alabama. Alabama's not going to run Roy Moore again. So even if we pick up 4, the Dems pick up 4, the Republicans are getting one back, which still puts it at best if Trump wins re-election, a 50-50 in the Senate, and that's if the Dems run the table, and I think that's relatively unlikely as well. But even if that were to happen, let's say the Dems won the presidency, let's say the Dems won the Senate, the first thing that they're doing isn't dealing with cannabis policy. They're dealing with immigration reform. They're dealing with medical insurance reform. There's healthcare is so much more of an important part of a Dem budget or a Dem platform than cannabis is. So realistically, as long as the Republicans have control of the Senate, which I think likely is at least for the next 2 years, nothing gets out of committee. It either goes to Crapo's desk or it goes to Lindsey Graham's desk or whoever's going to end up running Judiciary. Neither of those guys budge. And if they do put it to the Senate floor or put it to, McConnell's desk, then McConnell's not going to introduce it if he doesn't think it's not going to be vetoed by the president. And if Trump sees it as a democratically sponsored bill, which it would be, he's going to veto it on principle unless it comes with, $10 billion in wall funding. So, there is no movement happening right now, realistically in the Senate. And that means there's certainly not anything happening in the executive branch. But that can change. It doesn't change by the composition of the Senate. It changes by how many states that are large population states, like in Illinois, going to adult use the way it has, like Ohio, like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, potentially New York, Florida. If those states move to adult use in several years, it doesn't matter, who's in control of the Senate. Those are states that politically move the needle. And if they start deriving, legitimate amounts of tax revenue that's impacting the coffers of their state, then you're going to see, those state houses put a lot of pressure on the guys in D.C. to say, look, guys, like we can't keep operating something that's this big the way we're operating it. Something's got to change. And whether or not, you think that this isn't, a priority for you, we're here to tell you that, we represent a massive amount of your constituency. And we have to change it. So I think it happens more naturally than it does by the nature of, which side of the aisle you rest on. It's going to happen by, how much of the population has a robust adult use market. And I think we're probably 4 years away from seeing the states I just mentioned all have, 3 or 4 years of history where actually those programs are up and running and really producing. And that's, following where Colorado, how long it took Colorado to ramp up and how long it took Washington to ramp up. I think 4 years of ramp up in adult use is about where you start hitting kind of steady state.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this then as a follow-up. Would you say that some of those factors you just got done listing as to what might hold up a bill, are those actively playing a role right now in keeping the SAFE Banking Act from being considered in the Senate?
It's a good question. I think there's all this, I think there's fluctuating views on what it's going to take to get that through. But yeah, I think that there is no motivation right now to get it out of the Senate. I think you can put almost any bill right now on the floor of the House, and it's going to get a committee hearing, and it's going to get a vote in the committee, and it certainly will, probably make it to the House floor. But once it goes to the Senate, look, if McConnell said anything pretty overtly that we should, listen to, it's that he is the Grim Reaper, and he is where bills go to die. Any bill that's been passed by the Dems that hits his desk, he just disregards it. He has no intention of doing anything. And McConnell has one goal in mind right now, and that's confirming judges. It has nothing to do with democratic legislation. So, let's call it for what it is and know that if it's a bill that, came to his desk because the Dems passed it, unless it's like, tacked on as a rider, like, if the banking bill is a rider to a must-pass piece of legislation, maybe something that happens during COVID that, gets tacked on, we'll see. But if we look at what's happened with COVID so far, it's actually been, prejudice against cannabis businesses as far as, their lack of access to SBA right now. So it's, we can't look at the federal government right now with cannabis on anything and think they're our friends. They just aren't.
I want to take a quick break to thank you for listening to today's show and to invite you to listen to all the other great MJBulls Cannabis podcasts, like Raising Cannabis Capital, the show which features cannabis entrepreneurs that are raising money to expand their organization. Tune in each week on Thursdays and Sundays to hear founders of awesome cannabis companies talking about their business and their fundraising plans. Who knows? Maybe you'll discover the future Amazon or Apple of cannabis on the Raising Cannabis Capital podcast.
No, I agree with all that. And sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. We can advise our clients and we can mitigate the effects of not being able to deduct your selling, general, and administrative expenses. If that gets fixed, what comes next? Is it a federal excise tax? Which government agency is going to be the first one to knock on your door? Will it be the FDA, Food and Drug, alcohol, tobacco? So at least the environment we have right now is an environment we've dealt with for 10 or 12 years, and we kind of know the rules. Like I said, the repeal of 280E might bring on a host of other government intervention in our industry that we have no idea what it might be.
Yeah, it's another great point, Jim. It's something that I've been talking about now for probably 7 years of everyone talking about reclassifying cannabis away from Schedule 1. And my reaction is careful what you wish for. You go to Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, and now you're in the purview of the FDA. The FDA doesn't recognize dispensaries. It recognizes double-blind placebo studies and going through forward-thinking drug development.
Isn't that what we just ran into with CBD, right? CBD is legal, and the next day the FDA says, hey, we're regulating it now, and all of a sudden CBD edibles, which people have been eating for years, are going to have to go through all of those studies. So yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and that's true of what you're going to see on other parts of it as well. I mean, if you completely deschedule cannabis, so it actually falls in the purview of ATF. We don't know what they're going to do. What we know right now is the only reason none of these people are picking up, none of these alphabet agencies are picking cannabis up right now is because of the Schedule 1 status, where as far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist. It's not in anyone's purview. So it's, largely still uncharted waters. And the other thing I caution people is, that's great that right now, you think illegality is such a bad thing, but if you're an investor in the space, remember the second that, illegality ends is the second that, TPG and KKR and Blackstone and every other major private equity group does get involved. And anyone that's, in there right now, hopefully they've got enough stakes in the ground they can be sellers at that point. But if not, you're just going to get run over. So, the best thing you can have happen to you is, 5 years of building a business and to the point that, it's actually profitable, it's strong, and it's an attractive acquisition target, or it's, something that you can then put on the New York Stock Exchange. But right now, there's very few of those groups. So illegality in many ways is your friend as an investor and as an entrepreneur.
Well, that's a great way to transition to talk about some music. How about a friend of the devil is a friend of mine?
Yeah, look, it's going from one outlaw culture to another. I think you're either on the bus or off the bus, right?
So, Rob, you've got some history with the Grateful Dead family and Jerry's family. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface it with saying that, not super well, but I've had the unique experience over the last several years of getting to know these guys a little bit due to the fact that we pitched them on trying to do a Grateful Dead brand and doing a Garcia brand of cannabis. And through the process, I was able to spend a fair amount of time with the Grateful Dead's managers, guys named Bernie Cahill and Greg Seuss over at Activist. And then, Garcia's manager as well as a guy named Mark Allen down at Red Light. And, the Grateful Dead and the Garcia family were very interested in doing cannabis. And you probably saw the announcement recently that the Garcia family did, make a decision to work with a team out of the Northeast. But from my perspective, Deadhead my entire, adult life, saw my first show at age 16 in New York City, 9/20/88, I think was my first show at MSG. Saw 147 Grateful Dead shows with Garcia and didn't miss a Jerry Band show for the last 2 years of his life. For me, it was a passion thing. Like, Tuatara, my company at the time, had just done the Willie Nelson transaction. And my reaction is, hey, I think Willie's an absolute, star, and he's done amazing things for cannabis. But, if you really want, the band that, in my mind, represented cannabis culture, you had to go with Grateful Dead. So I made a real push internally to try to do something with those guys. And in the process was introduced to members of Jerry's family and spent a fair amount of time with their attorneys and with their managers. And, it ultimately didn't work out, but I made some great friends out of the process, and to this day keep in touch with a lot of those guys, and really, really feel fortunate that when I do see the people that I consider to be, the true Grateful Dead family, that, I'm now embraced by that group of people. And I feel just really, really fortunate to have had that opportunity.
For sure. That's a great opportunity. That's, for all the Deadheads, want to become buddies with somebody on the inside, and, to have a chance to do it is great and a lot of fun. But what I liked about your answer is it's very clear that this isn't just a business arrangement for you. This is your relationship with the Grateful Dead long predates that. I think you said at least back to 1988. And that's fantastic. That's really what drives Jim and I think, is, in fact, the first time we met, we talked business for 5 minutes until we started talking the Grateful Dead, and then we never quite got back around to business. And you and I, Rob, have had more than our share of late night conversations at some of these conferences, comparing shows and eras of the band and all sorts of things like that. Give us one or two of your, Grateful Dead with Jerry, top, 3 or 4 highlights of what you saw back in the day.
Oh, wow. I mean, okay. So first I'll preface by saying that, I'm 47 now, which meant that, I caught the last 7 or 8 years of Grateful Dead, and I did great for the number of shows I saw, but I missed the late 70s. I missed the early 80s. For me, 88 as a 16-year-old was about kind of as well as you could do. and so there's a lot of people that think, I didn't see the best of the best with that band, but respectfully disagree. I think some of the best things that ever happened, happened in the late 80s and the early 90s. Not necessarily full shows, but definitely single highlights. But things that I got to do. Let's see. I think as a whole show, 6/14/91 RFK was probably the favorite show that I saw, which is Helps with Franklin's Estimated Dark Star to open the second set. Which is ironically the same opening of the second set that happened on 9/10/91 with Branford Marsalis. So obviously the band liked that combination well enough that when they brought Branford out, they did it again. Let's see. I caught the first Branford show at 3/29/90, which was the Eyes Estimated second set opener and the Bird Song in the first set, which is kind of regarded as really special.
Was that Nassau Coliseum?
That was Nassau Coliseum. Yeah, it was 3/28, 3/29, 3/30. It was a 3-night run. And I still think the 28th was probably my favorite show of the three, but I caught all three of those, and amazing. I think that whole March 1990 run, you had Nassau, you had Albany, you had Hartford, which were announced basically as Warlock shows. It was a short, 15 show, I think, spring tour. And it was, at Cap Center, it was Phil's 50th birthday at the Cap Center in Landover, where they broke out Loose Lucy. So it's just an amazing, amazing run. I got to see a lot of, kind of the bigger breakouts that happened during that time. So I saw the Nude Speedway Boogie breakout in Oakland. I saw the Here Comes Sunshine breakout in Tempe, Arizona. I got to see the Black Throated Wind breakout in Landover. I saw the introduction of a lot of the new songs, like, So Many Roads, first time played, Days Between, first time played. And, the thing I think that, sticks out for me is, the best part of it was that I got to see the last 37 Grateful Dead shows in a row. Every single one of them up all the way to Chicago. So, I saw the good and the bad that happened during that time. There's some really crappy shows in that final tour, but there was also, some things that, were amazing. Like, Pittsburgh second set opener where it was pouring rain. They played 4 rain songs in a row. But even though it might not have been something, that, you look back on and say it was the best played thing you've ever seen, it was one of those things that at the time was pretty spectacular to be there for. And I feel that way of, seeing Deer Creek shows. I don't think you can ever go wrong with that venue. And, Deer Creek was canceled one night of that tour, and the other night was mediocre, but it was still Deer Creek. And, there's a lot of things that you look back on and think, 1995, the breaking out of Visions of Johanna that was played a couple times that year, were just, absolutely amazing. The first one in Salt Lake City was, to me, one of the more magical things I've ever seen. So a lot of good stuff that happened during that period.
Well, those are some great memories. It brings back a lot of memories for me, too. I certainly was in the groove at that time as well. I did a lot of Red Rock shows in the 80s till I was at the last Grateful Dead show at Red Rocks in 87 when they outgrew the venue. My last show, and it was a very sad show because Jerry just wasn't in good health, was 3 months before he passed away in May of 95 in Las Vegas at the Silver Bowl. And so that's a fond but sad memory.
Yeah, I saw every Vegas show they played. They played it 5 years in a row, and I think a total of 14 shows over 5 years. Great venue. Silver Bowl was a lot of fun, and there's always, most of the time super, super hot inside that place with heat lightning in the background. So it always made for, kind of a spectacular visual.
If you remember, there was a thermometer above the stage, right above where Jerry was playing. At midnight, it would show 100 degrees.
I remember being hosed down inside the fill zone just to keep people from passing out on the floor at a couple of those shows. It was so darn hot.
Then all 60,000 of us would head downtown to Las Vegas and party all night.
And you know what the funniest part about that was? Nobody stood out in the Las Vegas crowd, right? If you all went to downtown Chicago afterwards, you'd be like, oh, there's the Deadheads. You walk into the casinos, and it's kind of hard to tell who the Deadheads are from everybody else. They all look a little crazy.
I remember one time I was at a table. I went to most of those Vegas shows, too, and I was playing blackjack after the show late at night, loud and rowdy casino. I think it was lots of fun next to Circus Circus, and the dealers were kind of getting down on the Deadheads, started, dissing them and putting them down. I said, hey, to the dealer, hey, I said, cheer up. These guys are really bad card players.
Right. And they're all stoned.
Yeah. Even though 2/3 of the Grateful Dead songs are about playing cards.
Exactly.
You think we'd be a little bit better at it.
Well, no, but most of their songs are about being bad at playing cards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. but not knowing it. I think that's the whole idea of loser, right?
I was still pretty high from the show one night in Vegas, and I was absolutely clairvoyant. I busted that dealer so many times the table was cheering for me.
That's really funny because, Jim, I spent most of my time in Slots of Fun after those shows because that was back before, a lot of the really big hotels we know today in Vegas were built, and Circus was like a pretty viable place to stay. So I remember Slots of Fun being like the spot that like half of the show would empty out to. So I'm sure that you and I probably passed each other and rubbed shoulders back then before we knew each other.
I bet we did. I played a lot of blackjack after the shows at Slots of Fun.
But the question is where. I was out there for the 92 shows, the Steve Miller year, and we were the big whole group of guys, and we wound up staying at the Golden Nugget in downtown Las Vegas, and went that route. And it was fun. It was, a slightly different scene, but they had the midnight steak and egg breakfast that all the Deadheads were at after the shows. And it was tremendous fun. And for me, it was wonderful because I always liked Steve Miller. And then there was the whole Fly Like an Eagle or some of that stuff in the 70s that got a little too kitschy for me. I loved seeing him up on stage with the Dead, and and he was playing guitar right along with him, having a good old time.
Oh my goodness! I got to take issue with it, man. I thought that was the worst morning dew I ever saw.
Really,
was the Steve Miller do? And right as it gets to the point before the Guess It Doesn't Matter Anyways, and you got the soaring solo that for me makes a morning dew.
Yes,
that was they couldn't turn Steve down. I remember Phil looking over at the monitors, basically giving this look of turn this asshole down. We can't have Steve playing like this. And I remember just sitting there going come on, of all the great dudes, why is Steve Miller up there doing this right now? But, and I'm a Steve Miller fan as well. It's not that I dislike him as a player. I just thought that was a terrible mix between the two.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Chuck Berry open for him 1 year in Vegas?
I want to say yes. I know Santana was 1 year. I know Steve Miller was 1 year, but I think Chuck Berry was 1 year as well. Actually, if it wasn't, it might have been Chuck Berry. Actually, might have been Portland Meadows. I think he might have been Portland, Oregon, in 93 or 95.
And 1 year they had Roger McGuinn open for them.
And I'm going to Google this right now because I can't stand not knowing.
So here's my next question for you, though, Rob. Let's you saw more than enough Dead shows with Jerry that you fill that side of your platter very well. What do you think of John Mayer and Dead & Company? Are you a fan? Do you like going to their shows?
I've only seen them play one time, and it was because the managers of Dead & Co. had invited me to go to the show, and I graciously accepted. I saw them at the Hollywood Bowl last year, and had a really nice time. Look, I think John Mayer is an exceptional blues guitar player. For me, it's difficult. I'm a Grateful Dead fan, for sure, but I'm a Garcia fan first. And for me, the Garcia band was probably the thing that, if you were to say, pick your favorite band to go see live and, your favorite music to listen to, it's definitely JGB over the Grateful Dead.
No, I'm exactly. On any given night, I would have just as soon see the Jerry Garcia band as the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, on any given night, I would have taken it, 9 times out of 10, I would have taken the Garcia band. I think that the absolute pinnacle of Garcia I saw was with the Grateful Dead. But for consistency's sake, going to the Warfield was like going to church. And, every night that you'd go in there, you could sit there, have dinner and have drink service and sit and watch your favorite musician play with, Melvin playing, keys and John Kahn playing bass. And it was about as good as it got. But, but yeah, it's, with John Mayer playing with him, look, anything that keeps this alive and keeps this whole thing moving forward, I think is incredible. And I think that John Mayer obviously plays really well with the band. They really respect him as a player. They've played enough together now that there's times that, I'll be listening to Sirius Radio and I won't look down to see what it is. And I'll think that it's, Grateful Dead playing and it's Dead & Co. So there's definitely times where I'm amazed at how well he's got the tone down, sort of the way that John Kadalisic did for a while when he was playing with Further. But right now, if you were to say, would you go see Dead & Co. or would you see a different iteration? I'd probably go see Joe Russo's Almost Dead before I'd see Dead & Co. just because I think the energy right now for J-Rad is just so high. But anything that keeps the Grateful Dead tradition going, I think I'm 100% supportive. And for me, I don't play favorites. I'm just super stoked that's become such a part of the American tradition of music that I don't think this is going away any more than I think Mozart and Bach and Beethoven are going away. I think it's too big. It's too prevalent. And I think that, there's certain songs in the American canon of music. If you think about the Great American Novel versus the Great American Songbook, I think Ripple will go down as a song that kids will be singing at camp in 50 years. And I love that.
Well, here, one of the things that Jim and I always talk about, and this fits right into it, is that one of the things that we love the most is that we go to these shows. I go to the Dead, I go see Fish, and I go with my kids. I bring my kids with me, and they want to go and they want to be there. And it's something that we can do together. We both love the music, and it always makes me laugh because to this day, I can tell you that if I walked into my father's living room and went through his record collection, I don't think there's a single record in there that I would really have any true interest in listening to unless we were, hankering for a good show tune or something, right? And my father never really had all that much interest in the music that I was listening to. But I love the way that the Dead completely span the generations. And Jim, let me tell him about your son as well. His son's playing with one of the top Fish cover bands around. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yes, he's one of the top keyboard players in Denver. He plays that Beyond Key where Dead bands play all the time. John Candlestick has played there recently. And, we have a lot of conversations at my house with our two sons, and I'll come back around and they'll be planning their future, and I'll just say to them, that path is for your steps alone.
Yes.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll give you an anecdote. I lost my father about 13 years ago, and he was never supportive of me being a Deadhead when I was out on tour with the band. But the day that he passed, I went and checked he had a 5-disc CD changer, and 4 out of the 5 discs in his changer were Garcia, which, gave me just amazing thrill, and he became a big Garcia Grisman fan. That kind of is what got him into it. And then he started listening to, more of the double live disc of Garcia band from the early 90s. But it was one of those things that, when I opened that up and got to see that he'd come around, it warmed my heart in a way that you have no idea. And now I'm watching it with my kids who are 4 and 5. And, I'd love to say they're Grateful Dead fans. They are not Grateful Dead fans. They are huge Fish fans, though. My daughter at age 5 knows all the words to Meat Stick and all the words to Haley's Comet. And, she's singing, she can tell you 20 different Fish songs. Like we get in the car and she's like, put Fish on, which to me is, incredible. And she loves the fact that there's a lot of fun songs like Contact or Fee that she can sing. But whenever I play Grateful Dead songs, and I try to get her into ones that I think would be sort of, really nice, like, Working Man's Dead, American Beauty style, like American ballads that she'd get into. And she's just, it hasn't hit yet. It will, but it hasn't yet.
And how about you, Rob, on Fish?
How about new at Fish? I love Fish. Like for me, like, when Trey played with the Dead for Fare Thee Well, that was a dream come true. I started seeing Fish before I started seeing the Dead. My first Fish show is, when Burlington, Vermont, when I was 13 or 14 years old, just happenstance. And, I went on Fish tour, like, full summer Fish tour in 1991 when there was like 12 of us on Fish tour. So like, in many ways, like my first love as a band that like I felt close to, where I knew all the band members and, got to hang out with those guys in the early 90s, Fish was really accessible. And so, I've seen, far more Dead shows, but over the years, I still try to catch Fish 2 or 3 times a year. And, I still couch tour them. I watch Fish a lot more than I see any other band because there's so much of what they've done in the last 10 years that you can pull up on YouTube that it's just amazing sound quality and great visual quality. So hard not to like those guys. And if you were to say, who my favorite guitarist is, Garcia, it's 100%, but hard to deny just how amazing Trey is as a guitar player.
Couldn't agree more. Larry and I actually hooked up at Fare Thee Well in Chicago for the 50th. And boy, what I'll always remember about that show is I believe the first song was Box of Rain, but the second song was, what the hell was the second song? But a ripple. Oh, it was Jack Straw. And a ripple just went through the stadium. The energy was incredible.
Which, by the way, is happens to be the Garcia's attorney's favorite Grateful Dead song. So I'm a huge fan of Jack Straw as well. It was the first song I ever saw the Dead play on 9/20/88. 9/20/88 was Jack Straw, Thea Mama Tried, Big River to open the first set. So that was I'll never forget the feeling of seeing Jack Straw for the first time.
So here, when you talk about Fish and all of that, I'm a latecomer to Fish because I was so invested in the Dead first, and then as Fish was coming on the scene, I had already gotten into kids and all of that, and I just didn't have the bandwidth to go out and pull them in as well. But I've developed a whole new appreciation for them over the years. And, as time goes by, my appreciation develops more. So this last year, I realized that Trey is now the same age that Jerry was when Jerry died. Yet here's Trey, still alive, still kicking, and we could get into a whole different discussion about how he handled his heroin problem and how his bandmates supported him versus what happened with the Dead. But be that as it may, he's to me now the living example of what I always kind of thought Jerry would be. Oh, Jerry will be there forever. We'll be old and we'll still go see Jerry. Well, not only is Trey still playing, but he's playing hard and strong and good. But the other part of it is with Trey, and this ties into what you were saying before about going to see Dead & Company, which I completely agree with everything you said. And I'm glad you were able to say it in a way that I've never quite been able to say it. But a few years ago, my wife and I were vacationing out in Jackson, Wyoming, and she has a cousin who has a daughter who lives out there. And daughter's old enough that, she's just at that age where she just missed Jerry, but totally got, dived into Fish and caught the Grateful Dead buzz anyway, and, knows all about them. And she and her husband love to go see Dead & Company. And we were talking about it, and I was trying to explain to them why I do like Dead & Company. And it's fun. And like you say, the scene and just continuing all of that is great. But at the end of the day, it's not really the same. And they kept saying, oh, but, how can you say that? John Mayer is such a good guitar player. So I finally turned to them and, I was very proud of myself for this. And I said to them, imagine going to see Fish with John Mayer playing lead guitar instead of Trey. Right?
Yeah.
John Mayer's a great guitar player. He can do it, but it's not Trey. It's not Jerry. It's John Mayer. And I love him. And I thought it was great when they let him play, Jerry's Wolf guitar. I thought that was amazing. But, if I'm going to go out and hear a show, if I have a choice between one or the other, I'll take what I have and enjoy it. But, you just have to understand and appreciate that for guys like us who saw the real thing, it's never going to quite be the same.
Hey, listen, guys, we've run way over on our time. I could talk to you about this all afternoon. I want to maybe place a marker in closing that as we sit here today, Dead & Company has not canceled their summer tour. Let's hope they don't. Let's hope this pandemic subsides and we can go back to having concerts again. But thank you very much, Rob. A very good job. I really appreciated all your stories. Larry, thanks for all your input. Maybe we'll have you back again and we can pick this up with some more Fish stories.
I'd love that. Thanks, guys, for having me on. A lot of fun. Really, really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. You can always tell the good shows because Jim's telling me it's time to stop, and I'm thinking, we just got started.
I know. But hey, Larry, you want to sign us off?
I will sign us off this week. Jim, hope all is well with you and things continue to go well for you out in Colorado. Rob, as always, man, a pleasure to talk to you. It's been too long. We have a lot of catching up to do. Glad to hear things are going well for you. Thank you so much for agreeing to spend a few minutes with us and share your words of wisdom, both on marijuana and on the Grateful Dead. And to all of our listeners, have a great week. Thank you for listening. Stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon.
Tell me, boy, you make me so bored. You need to walk the other way. I tell you once more. Please get out of my way. I don't want you no more. We're done here, boy.
Hi, my name is Kira Reed, and I'd like to invite you to be inspired by the women who are leading in the cannabis industry. Each week, we will discuss empowerment, leadership, and what it means to be a woman in charge in marijuana, hemp, and CBD. As the founder of the Women Empowered in Cannabis community, I have had the great pleasure to get to know many brilliant and talented women who are CEOs, executives, politicians, advocates, and community leaders that are focused on creating a cannabis economy that is just, fair, and equal. We'll learn how these women make decisions, how they navigate a predominantly male industry, and what they're doing to level the playing field for women. I hope you'll join us.